In an unbelievable move, the HOA president dispatched the sheriff to my property because I was swimming in my own backyard lake. This was a body of water I had owned for 15 years, long before her subdivision was even a concept. Set the scene. I'm serenely floating in my private lake at sundown, listening to the loons cry out over the water, when abruptly, the wail of police sirens slices through the evening's cricket chorus like a power saw through velvet. Sheriff Deputy Martinez pulls onto my gravel drive, his expression mirroring my own bewilderment. "Sir, I apologize, but I am required to write you a citation based on an HOA complaint," he states, struggling to maintain a serious demeanor. Just beyond him, Karen Whitmore is positioned at my property's edge, arms folded, sporting that synthetic smile that never quite warmed her cold, blue eyes. The citation itself was for a $1,000 fine, penalizing me for unauthorized recreational water usage in a restricted zone. I'm just standing there, sopping wet, gaping at this document. "Ma'am," I said, "this lake is mine. I constructed this very dock with my 2 hands back when you were still a resident of California. How would you react if someone attempted to dictate the use of water on your personal land? Leave a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. I'm willing to bet you have your own HOA horror stories." Karen had no idea that I had dedicated 20 years of my life as a municipal finance director. A huge miscalculation on her part. Allow me to rewind and explain how I found myself in this predicament. My name is Garrett, and 3 years prior, I lost my wife, Sarah, to cancer. We had been married for 22 years, and her passing felt as though half of my very soul had been torn away. The grief was all-consuming. That sensation where breathing is a struggle, thoughts are impossible, and you cannot fathom a future without them. So, I did what any heartbroken widower might do. I relocated to the middle of nowhere. Well, perhaps not complete nowhere. I had inherited my grandfather's 4-acre estate in rural North Carolina, which featured a spring-fed lake that has been part of our family since 1952. Pop had constructed the original cabin himself after returning from Korea. That lake became his salvation, just as it was poised to become mine. Imagine this location. Pristine, clear water supplied by underground springs, encircled by towering pines that exude a scent reminiscent of Christmas morning. With every sunrise, loons would call to each other across the water as mist descended like spirits dancing upon its surface. I would sit on the dock Pop had built, drinking coffee from Sarah's cherished mug, the one with the chipped handle she wouldn't part with, and watch rainbow trout break the surface to snatch insects. The quiet was a form of therapy. There was no traffic, no pressing deadlines, only the sound of wind rustling through the trees and the sporadic splash of a leaping fish. I had served for 20 years as the municipal finance director for Millbrook County, where I audited budgets and exposed dishonest contractors who tried to sneak inflated invoices by the city. From that experience, I learned that most bureaucratic harassment is rooted in obscure ordinances that people rarely question. A piece of knowledge that would be invaluable in my dealings with a petty tyrant like Karen. After Sarah passed away, however, I took an early retirement. The lake transformed into my refuge, my treatment, and my motivation to face each day. Then, Karen Whitmore arrived, like a tempest in designer footwear, demanding to speak with Mother Nature's supervisor. In 2019, a developer acquired the old logging road adjacent to my northern fence line. In no time, bulldozers were clearing away 100-year-old oak trees, and the drone of chainsaws usurped the tranquility of my mornings. The odors of diesel fuel and freshly milled lumber wafted over my land like an industrial miasma, blending with the pine fragrance until it smelled as if a hardware store had detonated in the woods. Within 2 years, 47 McMansions had popped up like fungi after a rainstorm. They marketed it as Lakeside Luxury Estates, a comical name given that their sole view of a lake was of my property. But I suppose nothing conveys luxury like spending $800,000 to gaze at someone else's water from your kitchen window. Karen came from California, piloting a white BMW with vanity plates that read RALTR1, and an ego as large as Texas. She was precisely what you would imagine. Blonde highlights that cost more than my monthly food budget, and a designer handbag likely worth more than my pickup truck. She had the kind of forced smile that conveys, "I've never encountered a homeowner's fee I didn't want to increase." In just 6 months, She had skillfully positioned herself as HOA president and launched her mission to bring civilization to us uncultured country residents. It started with passive-aggressive, neighborly drop-ins. She would clatter up my gravel driveway in her stilettos. And let me assure you, stilettos on gravel is a sound akin to a tap dancer having a convulsion, bearing store-bought cookies and remarking on the character of my rustic cabin. The cloying scent of her perfume would mingle with the natural pine air like a cheap air freshener in a mortuary. When I politely turned down her proposition to purchase my property for 60 cents on the dollar, her plastic smile became predatory. That polished facade slipped just long enough for me to glimpse the calculating real estate predator lurking beneath. The harassment began subtly, with complaints filed with the county regarding my unpermitted dock. I presented them with permits from 2008, which were older than most of her subdivision. Next, she asserted that my trout were polluting the watershed. The environmental inspector found this so amusing he laughed, stating my lake was purer than many municipal water sources. But Karen had been diligent. She unearthed a long-forgotten ordinance from the 1920s concerning permits for recreational water use, the type of bureaucratic relic that lingers in dusty legal texts like a legal parasite. In my time with the municipality, I had witnessed how these inactive ordinances could be used as weapons against landowners unaware of their rights. She persuaded the county commissioners, who happened to be her former real estate clients, to amend it with retroactive effect. All at once, any lake-based activity within 500 feet of a residential development needed HOA sanction. My lake, which had been there for 70 years before her subdivision was even a glimmer in a developer's eye, was now under Karen's dominion. A woman who had been a resident for a mere 18 months was attempting to regulate water that had belonged to my family for 3 generations. It was then that she committed her first major blunder. She summoned the police on a grieving widower who was merely trying to find solace in his own backyard. A very poor decision, Karen. A truly terrible move. 2 weeks following the swimming incident, Karen appeared at my residence with backup. I was on my porch, partaking in the morning coffee ritual that preserved my sanity, when I detected the crunch of several vehicles on my gravel driveway. The aroma of fresh pine was now mixed with an odor that brought to mind bureaucratic desperation, that distinct blend of inexpensive cologne and sweaty polyester that seems to shadow small-time grifters. Karen exited her BMW with a look of triumph, tailed by a man in a poorly fitting county inspector uniform. His name tag identified him as Randy Morrison, and he brandished a clipboard as if it were Excalibur and he the designated king of minor harassment. "Mr. Henderson," Karen declared with artificial sweetness, "we've been alerted by an anonymous complaint about your commercial fishing business." I almost spit out my coffee. Commercial fishing? Lady, I stock this lake for my personal enjoyment. Randy puffed up his chest and smacked the clipboard against his thigh. A nervous habit that might have been comical if he weren't attempting to extort me. "Sir, you'll need to present your business license for this aquaculture operation, or I will have to impose daily fines of $500 until you are in compliance." Having encountered my share of corrupt inspectors during my municipal career, I could recognize a scam when I saw one. Randy had the evasive eyes of a used car dealer trying to sell a Honda without an engine. I decided to play along, retrieving my property deed and fishing permits. "These are for private use," I clarified calmly. "I introduce about 50 trout twice a year for my own fishing." Randy gave the documents a cursory glance. "An anonymous tip alleges you're operating an unlicensed commercial venture. Until you can demonstrate otherwise, this lake is closed." That evening, while Karen was likely celebrating with a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's car payments, I booted up my old laptop. 20 years in municipal service had taught me that every bureaucrat leaves a paper trail, and Randy Morrison's was about to be scrutinized under a very powerful lens. The initial finding: Randy's inspector certification had expired 2 years prior. The individual threatening me with daily fines wasn't even legally qualified to inspect a child's lemonade stand, much less my property. I recalled a case from my time with the county where a fraudulent inspector had employed similar tactics. The crucial step was to document everything before they knew they were exposed. I took a screenshot of his expired license, lodged a formal complaint with the state licensing authority, and began to probe further. A deep dive into public records showed that Randy had been carrying out inspections in 3 different counties with his expired credentials. This was not mere incompetence. It was methodical fraud. When the state board reached out to Randy regarding his unlicensed operations, he reportedly had a total breakdown, News spreads quickly in small counties, and I learned through courthouse gossip that he had called Karen in a state of panic, pleading with her. To resolve the situation, Karen, ever the strategic mastermind, concluded that the best defense was a strong offense. 3 days later, a formal-looking invoice arrived in my mail. The Lakeside Luxury Estates HOA was now levying a liability insurance surcharge of $500 per month for dangerous water activities. They had backdated it to January since it was now July. I supposedly owed them $3,000. I had to give her points for audacity. Karen was essentially billing me rent to swim in the very lake my grandfather had excavated with a borrowed bulldozer in 1952, while Randy was confronting a $10,000 penalty and potential criminal prosecution for impersonating an inspector. I was delving into property law precedents. Years prior, I had examined a pivotal Supreme Court case on government overreach, Lucas versus South Carolina, in which bureaucrats had tried to prohibit all construction on a man's coastal land. The court determined that the government cannot deprive a property of all economically beneficial use without providing compensation. The underlying principle was straightforward. They cannot compel you to pay fees for lawful activities on your own property. With this precedent in hand, I sought a preliminary injunction in county court to halt Karen's extortion. However, I also hired a surveyor to verify my property lines, a move prompted by an intuition honed over 2 decades of dealing with questionable characters. The survey's findings were like a combination of Christmas morning and a lottery win. Karen's esteemed subdivision was encroaching 15 feet onto state forest land. 3 of the McMansions, one of which belonged to her cousin Danny, were technically trespassing on public land. I submitted an anonymous report to the state forestry department. At times, the most effective revenge is simply to adhere to the rules while observing your adversaries entangle themselves in their own schemes. Within a week, 3 HOA residences were served with violation notices for unlawful land use. The potential penalties were $50,000 per building, in addition to removal expenses. Suddenly, Karen's paltry $3,000 invoice seemed like insignificant pocket change. The following morning, Karen charged across my property line like Sherman's march through Georgia. Though Sherman likely had superior etiquette, her face was flushed enough to halt traffic, and she was yelling about harassment and diminishing property values, loud enough to frighten the loons from my lake and possibly rouse the deceased in the adjacent county. "You think you're so clever?" she screeched, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I am going to sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." I calmly presented her with the court documents for my injunction hearing, still warm from being printed. "I'll see you in court, Karen. Be sure to bring your checkbook and perhaps a skilled lawyer, because you will require both." Her mouth flapped open and closed like one of my trout struggling for oxygen. The sound of her retreating heels on the gravel was a melody more beautiful than any loon's call. Karen, it seemed, learned nothing from the Randy incident because 2 weeks later she chose to advance to psychological warfare. By psychological warfare, I mean she contacted Channel 7 News. I was giving my trout their morning meal. Yes, I maintained a feeding schedule, don't pass judgment. When I heard the distinct rumble of a news van making its way up my driveway, the sound of those heavy tires on gravel is unique, like someone crushing bubble wrap made of stone. Reporter Megan Torres stepped out, followed by a cameraman who appeared as though he would prefer to be covering any other story. Trailing them, Karen got out of her BMW, dressed in what I can only call her concerned citizen attire. A conservative blazer, subtle makeup, and a look that implied she was holding back tears over the dire situation of endangered property values. "Mr. Henderson," Megan shouted, moving toward me with her practiced reporter's gait. "We're here regarding concerns that your lake activities pose a threat to the community's water supply." I glanced at Karen, who was positioning herself deliberately in the background with 3 neighbors she had apparently enlisted as background actors. Their expressions displayed the kind of feigned concern seen in drug commercials just before the list of side effects is read. "Ma'am," I responded, putting down my container of fish food. "I'm not aware of any concerns you might be alluding to." The questions then came in a flurry. Was I conscious of the environmental hazards? Did I have any regard for the safety of children? And what about the property values? It was clear Karen had prepped Megan with leading questions intended to portray me as some sort of ecological menace. But here's what you learn from 20 years of municipal meetings. You remain composed when people are trying to make you look bad for the cameras. I extended an invitation to the news crew to test my lake water right then and there. The expression on Karen's face as I scooped a clear glass of water directly from the lake and drank it all while holding the camera's gaze, was invaluable. It was like seeing someone realize they've arrived at a tank battle armed with a water pistol. This water has been tested by County Environmental Services 3 times in the last year, I explained calmly, producing a folder thicker than a phone book. The lake is cleaner than most municipal water supplies. Would you be interested in seeing the reports? I provided Megan Torres with copies of all my documentation. Environmental inspection reports confirming pristine water quality, historical property deeds that verified my water rights going back to 1892, current and valid county permits, and photographs that documented Karen's subdivision's encroachment onto state land. You could almost watch the narrative shift in that moment. Megan's inquiries grew more pointed, focusing on why Karen would make assertions that were contradicted by the evidence. Karen began to perspire, despite the October chill carrying the scent of burning leaves from down the valley. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Megan asked, aiming the camera at Karen. "Do you possess any evidence to substantiate your claims about water contamination?" Karen's reply was a masterclass in verbal acrobatics. She faltered, speaking of potential risks and community concerns, while her eye started to twitch, a signal I had learned to spot from innumerable budget meetings with dishonest contractors. It was then I chose to reveal what I had discovered about Karen's history. Throughout my years auditing municipal contracts, I had built a network of contacts in several states. A handful of phone calls had shown that Karen Whitmore was not new to the business of neighborhood disruption. "Megan," I said, "you may want to investigate Mrs. Whitmore's prior communities in California and Arizona. Certain patterns become apparent when you examine the paper trail." Karen's face turned pale beneath her makeup. She knew I had done my research. The interview concluded with Karen insisting on equal time to present the HOA's viewpoint. Megan consented to a follow-up piece, which proved to be Karen's second major error. While I readied for the next round by compiling more evidence, Karen apparently spent the week cashing in favors. The station manager happened to be Jim Patterson, with whom I had collaborated on several municipal transparency projects during my time with the county. It's a small world, particularly when you have a reputation for honest accounting and exposing financial fraud. The follow-up report was broadcast the next Thursday. Megan Torres delivered a fair segment, showcasing both properties, but Karen's appearance was pure comedic gold. She contradicted her own statements multiple times, became defensive when asked basic questions, and inadvertently confessed that she had never actually tested the subdivision's well water she professed to be protecting. In contrast, I offered calm, evidence-based answers, supported by documentation. The visual difference was remarkable. Karen looking increasingly agitated while I sat there with binders full of proof. Like some kind of bureaucratic superhero, the community's reaction was overwhelmingly positive. My voicemail was flooded with messages from neighbors expressing gratitude for my standing up to Karen's intimidation. Several noted they had been too scared to voice their concerns before, fearing retaliation through HOA fines. But Karen was not finished. Mortified by the media coverage and confronted with questions about her past, she opted for a nuclear approach. The following Monday, I was visited by the county health department. Karen had lodged a complaint alleging my cabin's septic system was leaking into the lake, contaminating the watershed, and endangering public health. She insisted on an immediate halt to all lake activities pending a comprehensive environmental inquiry. The health inspector, a competent professional named Marcus who knew his job, showed up with proper identification and legitimate credentials. I received him with full transparency, even offering him coffee as he performed his inspection. When Marcus found that my cabin utilized a cutting-edge composting toilet system with no sewage discharge into the lake, his response was not what Karen had anticipated. "This is essentially an eco-friendly model," he said to me, snapping photos of the setup. "Could I get your contractor's details? I know several people who would be keen to install a system like this." Karen's complaint was formally rejected as frivolous and malicious, terminology that would be beneficial in subsequent legal actions. The victory was satisfying, but I knew it was only the beginning. Karen was escalating at the speed of a rocket, and I suspected her next maneuver would be even more reckless. If Karen possessed any remaining shred of sense, she would have retreated after the septic system debacle. Instead, she doubled down, behaving like a gambler who has a mortgage payment on the line and what they thought were pocket aces turn out to be a pair of twos. On a Friday afternoon, I was splitting firewood behind my cabin, the steady thud of the axe aiding my contemplation of Karen's spiraling irrationality. when I recognized the familiar strain of a delivery truck ascending my gravel driveway. The postal carrier seemed regretful as he presented me with a certified letter so thick it could have stopped a horse. The return address brought a smile to my face. Rutherford and Associates, Charlotte's priciest law firm. Karen had engaged the type of attorneys who bill $600 an hour to compose strongly worded letters that threaten legal action over parking disagreements. The cease and desist letter insisted I immediately halt all nuisance water activities that purportedly breached noise ordinances. Based on their imaginative reading of municipal law, my swimming generated excessive splashing sounds that interfered with the peaceful enjoyment of adjacent properties. They demanded $5,000 in mediation fees to forestall a full-blown lawsuit. I had to commend the ingenuity. Karen was, in effect, trying to fine me for the sound of splashing I made while swimming in my own lake. The woman had elevated petty despotism to a high art, but the legal notice was merely the precursor. During the weekend, Karen orchestrated what could only be termed a surveillance operation. Members of the HOA began to drive past my property at a crawl of 5 miles per hour, capturing photos and videos of my every action. Someone left passive-aggressive notes on my truck's windshield concerning respecting community standards and being a good neighbor. The county suddenly took a keen interest in my property. A visit from the building inspector on Monday, the fire marshal on Tuesday, and the tax assessor on Wednesday. Each visit was prompted by anonymous complaints about supposed violations. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of bureaucratic harassment. Denser than the morning mist over the lake. In my municipal career, I had witnessed this strategy before. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. The objective was not to discover genuine violations, but to wear me down with relentless harassment until I finally gave in and left. Karen had evidently studied the manual on how to dismantle property owners through legal warfare, but Karen had made a grave mistake. She had initiated a conflict with someone who knew his way around public records and could trace financial trails. That weekend, I spent 2 full days in the basement of the county records office, a place that smells of aged paper and shattered aspirations. What I unearthed was more rewarding than Christmas morning. Karen's subdivision had been constructed under an emergency wetlands permit that mandated a 25-foot buffer zone from all natural water bodies. 3 houses, including Karen's own McMansion, had been erected inside this buffer zone. The infractions carried potential fines of $10,000 per day, with the possibility of demolition orders if the environmental damage was deemed significant. But that was not the best discovery. I also formally requested the HOA's financial records under North Carolina's public records law, a right available to any property owner within the association's purview. What I uncovered made Randy's fraudulent inspector credentials seem like a minor parking violation. Karen had been using the HOA's funds as her personal spending account. There was no competitive bidding for maintenance contracts, despite state law mandating it for any expenditure exceeding $10,000. Her husband Rick's landscaping business had an exclusive annual contract worth $45,000. Pool maintenance was awarded to her cousin Danny for $28,000 a year. The legal fees category even included payments to her own personal attorney for issues entirely separate from HOA affairs. Years ago, I had dealt with a case involving a municipal official who had employed similar self-dealing tactics. The crucial element was to document the recurring pattern and prove a deliberate intention to commit fraud. Karen had left a paper trail as wide as Interstate 85. While I was constructing my case, Karen petitioned for a temporary restraining order against me. She alleged that I was stalking and harassing HOA members and had made violent threats during our property line dispute. The court hearing was set for Tuesday morning, with sheriff's deputies delivering the papers as I was giving my trout their evening feed. I retained Patricia, an attorney specializing in HOA conflicts who had a reputation for decimating corrupt board members. Patricia examined my evidence and smiled, the kind of smile that makes opposing counsel extremely uneasy. "Garrett," she said, laying out the proof on her conference table, "Karen is about to discover why you don't show up to a gunfight with a knife." The court hearing was a spectacle. Karen appeared with 3 HOA members as her witnesses, all dressed in their finest attire and rehearsing their concerned citizen expressions. I arrived with a binder of evidence that was heavy enough to serve as a boat anchor. Judge Margaret Yates, a no-nonsense woman with 3 decades of experience handling frivolous litigation, scrutinized the documents with the meticulousness of a forensic accountant. Karen's witnesses contradicted one another under simple cross-examination. and my security camera footage unequivocally showed who was perpetrating the actual harassment. When Karen's lawyer attempted to introduce evidence of my supposed threatening conduct, Patricia presented audio recordings of every single interaction. On the recordings, Karen's voice sounded increasingly unhinged. While mine stayed consistently calm and professional, Judge Yates denied Karen's request for a restraining order and instead granted a temporary protective order against Karen, mandating that the HOA stop all surveillance and trespassing. She also granted me $2,500 for attorney's fees and cautioned Karen about potential perjury charges. For providing false testimony under oath, Karen's tantrum in the courthouse parking area became a story for the local press. She yelled at the judge about the corrupt system and raved about how I was destroying the community, loud enough to wake the dead in 3 counties. The newspaper reporter who observed the outburst penned a front-page article titled, "HOA President's Courtroom Tantrum." That evening, several residents of the subdivision approached me in private. They disclosed that Karen had been harassing them as well. Pool parties were shut down for noise infractions, garden ornaments were declared architecturally inappropriate, and parking tickets were issued for guests who stayed longer than 4 hours. Some residents were even contemplating a recall petition to oust Karen from the board. But as I was relishing this minor triumph, Patricia had found something in the original HOA charter that was about to alter the entire situation. Tucked away in the dense legal jargon was a clause I had completely overlooked, one that would permanently alter the balance of power. Any property owner situated within 1,000 feet of the subdivision had the right to petition to join the HOA as a voting member. My lake property not only met the geographical criteria, but as the largest single piece of land, I would command 30% of the voting shares. Karen had been so preoccupied with harassing me that she had never considered the possibility that I could simply become a member of her little fiefdom and vote her out. The irony was exquisite. In her desperate bid to control my property, Karen had inadvertently given me the means to control hers. As Patricia was getting ready for our subsequent legal action, she unearthed a detail that altered the entire landscape. She had been examining the original subdivision plat maps, those tedious technical documents most people don't bother to read, when she discovered something that prompted her to call me at 6 in the morning. "Garrett, you need to come down here right away," she said, her voice filled with the kind of enthusiasm lawyers only have when they've found a definitive piece of evidence. Karen's whole development is a house of cards, and it's on the verge of collapsing. I drove to her office through the early morning fog drifting off my lake, the scent of damp pine needles mingling with a sense of anticipation. Patricia had coffee ready and documents laid out on her conference table, looking like a detective cracking a murder case. The discovery was astounding. Karen's development was in violation of the original county master plan in ways that could lead to the shutdown of the entire subdivision. The land had been zoned for low-density rural residential use, which meant a maximum of 16 houses on the 95-acre plot. Karen's 47 McMansions surpassed the zoning density by more than 300%. But this is where the story took a fascinating turn. The developer had bypassed this limitation by using something known as an emergency housing shortage provision, a loophole established after Hurricane Florence displaced thousands of families in 2019. These emergency variances permitted higher density construction on a temporary basis to deal with the housing emergency. The operative word was temporarily. These emergency clauses were set to expire after 5 years unless the county commission specifically renewed them. The variance for Karen's subdivision was due to expire on December 15th, only 6 months from then. If the variance was not renewed, 31 houses would need to be demolished to comply with the original zoning regulations. The remaining 16 homeowners would be facing a financial catastrophe. Patricia displayed the HOA financial forecasts on her laptop. Current dues are based on 47 paying households at $320 per month, she clarified. If 31 homes are torn down, the remaining residents will have to bear the same operational expenses with just 16 units. The figures were grim. Monthly dues would skyrocket from $320 to $940 per home. Most of the residents were oblivious to the fact that they were living on a financial time bomb. But the true bombshell was what Patricia discovered in Karen's correspondence, which we had obtained through the discovery process. Karen had been aware of the expiration date from the very beginning. She had been discreetly lobbying the county commissioners for a renewal, but her campaign of harassment against me had backfired spectacularly. During my time in municipal finance, I had collaborated with several of the current planning commission members on different projects. They knew me as the person who consistently followed correct procedures and identified financial discrepancies before they turned into major scandals. Commissioner Martinez had even pointed to that nice man with the lake as a model of responsible rural development. Karen's public outburst and legal harassment had transformed potential supporters into adversaries. Her prospects of securing a renewal for the variance were somewhere between slim and none. Patricia then pointed to the original HOA charter documents, highlighting a section that made my coffee taste even better. The charter defined membership as all property owners within the community boundaries, which encompassed a 100-foot buffer zone around the entire subdivision. My property was situated within that buffer zone by a margin of 23 feet. As a pre-existing landowner with legal standing, I was entitled to join the HOA as a voting member. The charter stipulated that voting influence was determined by property size and assessed value. My 4-acre lakefront property was valued at $485,000, whereas the average home in the subdivision was assessed at $225,000. Under the proportional voting system, I would hold 31% of the sway in all HOA matters. If you join the HOA, Patricia detailed, you can veto any dues increases, call for special elections for board members, get access to all financial records without going through the public records process, and propose charter amendments with your voting power. The irony was impeccable. Karen had dedicated months to trying to control my property using HOA rules. Now, I had the opportunity to join her HOA and control her, but as I sat there, examining the legal papers, a significant realization dawned on me. I had no desire to ruin this community. Many of the residents were victims of Karen's manipulations, just as I was. The real answer wasn't retribution. It was to remove the malignant growth and let the patient recover. My objective changed from seeking revenge to restoring the community, oust Karen, rectify the financial issues, establish a sustainable HOA that genuinely served its members. Instead of fueling one person's craving for power, Karen, in the meantime, had somehow gotten wind that details about the zoning expiration were getting out. She had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for the upcoming Saturday, stating that urgent financial matters needed immediate discussion. The meeting announcement was sent out with very little notice, a classic tactic to suppress attendance. I had 72 hours to submit my HOA membership application and rally support from the disgruntled residents. Saturday morning was set to be the decisive moment for the future control of the community. Patricia spent the weekend drafting legal documents while I contacted the residents who had come to me after our court victory. The clock was ticking, and the outcome would determine not just control of the HOA, but the financial viability of 47 families. The prospect of justice was almost tangible, but it would demand flawless execution and some assistance from neighbors who were weary of living under Karen's rule of petty despotism. Saturday morning could not arrive soon enough, but I had 3 days to form an alliance capable of toppling Karen's empire of petty tyranny. The scent of fresh coffee and resolve filled my cabin as Patricia and I laid out our strategy like generals orchestrating D-Day. First on the list was recruiting Janet Morrison, a retired teacher on Maple Court who had been meticulously documenting Karen's overreach for 2 years. Janet possessed the quiet resilience one finds in educators accustomed to dealing with difficult parents and budget constraints. Karen had fined her $200 for installing a bird bath that was deemed non-compliant. Apparently, concrete doves were a violation of the architectural covenant's vision of suburban bliss. When I contacted Janet, her voice was tinged with 20 years of pent-up frustration. "Mr. Henderson, I have been waiting for someone to finally confront that woman. What do you need?" Janet's spiral-bound notebook held 2 years' worth of violations, fines, and harassment incidents, all cataloged with the meticulousness of a teacher's grade book. She had recorded everything, from Karen's impromptu inspections to the HOA board meetings where any opposing viewpoints were methodically silenced. The next person was Bob Martinez, an accountant on Oak Ridge Drive who had made the mistake of inquiring about the HOA's finances. Bob was the type of numbers-oriented individual who could spot when expenditures didn't align, a perilous characteristic in Karen's world of imaginative bookkeeping. "I've been attempting to see the actual invoices for months," Bob said as we sat in the local diner, the smell of bacon and honest dialogue permeating the space. "Karen insists everything is proprietary, but I've identified $43,000 in unaccounted for expenses in this year's budget alone." Bob's spreadsheet revealed a pattern of financial discrepancies that would make any auditor's pulse quicken. Landscaping charges that didn't correspond to the work done, equipment acquisitions with no proof of delivery, and legal fees for services entirely unrelated to HOA matters. Our third ally was Lisa Park, a civil engineer who had initially designed the subdivision's drainage system before Karen altered the plans without the necessary permits. Lisa had the practical sense of someone who constructs things that are meant to function in the real world. Karen altered my drainage designs to cut costs. Lisa stated during our strategy session at my cabin, her modifications now channel runoff directly into your lake. These violations could lead to the shutdown of the entire subdivision if the state environmental agency becomes aware. Lisa provided technical know-how and professional standing, which was precisely what we needed to counteract Karen's tactics of emotional manipulation. On Friday evening, we conducted our final strategy meeting at my kitchen table. Patricia had assembled 3 binders of evidence, each meticulously arranged for maximum effect. The approach was precise: expose Karen's financial deceit, unveil the zoning time bomb, and put forward my membership application as the resolution to both issues. Bob was tasked with the financial presentation, using straightforward charts that any homeowner could grasp. $45,000 to Rick's Landscaping Company for services valued at $18,000. $28,000 for pool maintenance that was actually done weekly instead of the contracted daily schedule. And legal fees that covered Karen's personal divorce lawyer, paid for with community money. Janet would read statements from harassed residents, illustrating the human toll of Karen's abuse of power. Lisa would detail the infrastructure violations and environmental hazards that Karen had concealed from the community. During my time in municipal government, I had learned that people are more moved by stories than by numbers. We needed the residents to view Karen as the core problem, not just a symptom of poor leadership. Every violation, every fine, every instance of harassment was part of a larger scheme to consolidate her power and fleece the community. Patricia went over the legal steps we would need to take. North Carolina HOA regulations stipulated that emergency board elections could be initiated by any member who could provide evidence of financial mismanagement. My membership application would grant me the authority to propose such a motion, and my 31% voting share would make it impossible for Karen's allies to prevent it. The contingency plan was just as critical. If Karen attempted to adjourn the meeting prematurely, Patricia would reference specific bylaw provisions for addressing member issues. If Karen argued that I couldn't speak because I wasn't a member, my application would give me immediate standing. If she were to call the police, all of our evidence was legally acquired, and we would be on public grounds. Saturday morning dawned with the kind of crisp October air that makes anything seem achievable. We convened at my cabin at 7:00 a.m., 3 hours ahead of the scheduled HOA meeting. The aroma of bacon and coffee mingled with a sense of nervous excitement as we went over our final preparations. Janet was anxious but resolute. Someone needs to stop her before she completely ruins this community. Bob was eager to finally bring the financial fraud to light. Numbers don't lie, and Karen's numbers have been lying for 3 years. Lisa brought maps and technical diagrams that would make Karen's infrastructure violations undeniable. When the residents see how much money she has squandered on shortcuts, they will understand why their fees are constantly rising. I felt more at peace than I had in months. After years of being on the defensive against Karen's assaults, we were finally taking the offensive with irrefutable evidence and legal backing. Patricia handed out copies of all our documents and cautioned everyone about Karen's probable strategies. We should anticipate personal attacks, baseless accusations, and emotional manipulation. The main thing is to remain focused on the facts and let Karen's own actions speak for themselves. At 9:30, we loaded our evidence into Bob's van and headed to the community center. The sense of anticipation was palpable, mixed with the gratification of knowing we had prepared exhaustively. Karen's reign of petty terror was on the verge of collapse, and justice was about to be served with a side of proper financial documentation. The only remaining question was whether Karen would concede gracefully or drag the entire subdivision down with her in a blaze of narcissistic rage. In the week leading up to our final confrontation, Karen completely lost control. Like a trapped animal armed with a law degree and social media access, she initiated what can only be called a scorched earth strategy aimed at ruining my reputation before I could ruin hers. It began on Friday night with menacing text messages to Janet. Spreading falsehoods about HOA matters is a basis for a defamation lawsuit. Karen texted at 11:47 p. It seems insomnia and desperation are a potent combination. She then contacted Bob's accounting firm on Monday morning, alleging he was misusing company resources to harass innocent community volunteers. The piece de resistance was her call to the state engineering board, where she reported Lisa for professional misconduct simply because she had dared to highlight Karen's unpermitted drainage alterations. 3 women who had merely posed questions about their community were now confronting professional backlash from an HOA president who had completely lost her grip on reality. But Karen's campaign of retaliation was far from over. She filed yet another police report, this time claiming I had made violent threats during our property line disagreement, conveniently omitting that our entire exchange had been captured by my security cameras. The officer who documented the report was the same Deputy Martinez who had initially ticketed me for swimming. His report made note of Karen's increasingly unstable behavior and her failure to provide any concrete evidence. Saturday morning marked Karen's crowning achievement of foolishness. I showed up early at the community center only to find a handwritten sign affixed to the door. Meeting moved to 847 Maple Court due to security issues. Karen's garage? The woman had shifted an HOA meeting for 47 households to her 2-car garage, which could perhaps accommodate 15 people if half of them were underfed teenagers. The smell of motor oil and desperation filled the air like a poisonous fog. Patricia immediately raised an objection, pointing to HOA bylaws that mandated sufficient meeting space for all members. Karen's defense was that security threats necessitated a restricted attendance. Apparently, transparent governance had become a matter of public safety. As residents began to show up and found themselves standing in Karen's driveway, unable to hear a thing, the discontent started to brew. Nothing highlights petty despotism quite like compelling your neighbors to stand outside in the October chill because you are terrified of democracy. You don't even reside here, Karen screeched when I presented my membership application. You have no right to tell us what to do. The expression on her face when Patricia clarified my legal entitlement to join under the original charter was invaluable. Like seeing someone realize they've just stepped on a landmine. Her main supporters, including her husband Rick and cousin Danny, suddenly grasped that my 31% voting share would render their small circle of power obsolete. Karen's breakdown then began in full force. She yelled about illegal interference with a private association and alleged that I had fabricated documents and bribed county officials. Her accusations grew more and more bizarre and paranoid, even suggesting I was part of a complex conspiracy that involved the county commissioners, the state forestry department, and likely the Illuminati. Several residents took a step back from Karen's tirade, visibly disturbed by her unhinged conduct. When your HOA president begins to sound like a street corner conspiracy theorist, even the most devoted followers start to doubt their loyalty. Patricia invoked HOA Bylaw Article 12, Emergency Procedures, which mandated a vote to change location when the meeting space was insufficient. During my time in municipal government, I had seen similar strategies employed by city council members attempting to stifle public participation. The solution was always the same. Force a vote and let democracy take its course. With 23 residents now in attendance, the vote to relocate to the community center passed 18-5. Karen refused to accept the outcome, asserting that only official board members could convene meetings. Patricia referenced state law, demonstrating that members could overrule board decisions when constitutional rights were being infringed upon. It was at this point that Karen called the police. Deputy Martinez showed up, looking like a man who would rather be managing traffic or pursuing actual criminals, when Karen insisted on arrests for illegal assembly. He calmly explained that this was a civil dispute and recommended they resolve it like adults. Advice that went unheeded. The group moved to the community center, a public facility where Karen's suppressive tactics were ineffective. 31 residents were present, the highest turnout for an HOA meeting in the subdivision's history. The atmosphere in the room was charged, like a powder keg awaiting a spark. Karen showed up 20 minutes late, with her lawyer on speakerphone, attempting to argue that the meeting was invalid because of the change in location. The residents were becoming increasingly annoyed with her procedural stonewalling. They had come for answers about their community's finances and leadership, not to witness their HOA president have a public meltdown. I maintained a strategic calm, taking notes as Karen dug herself into a deeper hole with each objection. Residents started to ask direct questions about landscaping costs, pool maintenance expenses, and legal fees, Karen's responses grew more evasive, inconsistent, and desperate. When Bob Martinez rose to ask about the $45,000 landscaping contract, Karen declared it was proprietary information that could not be discussed in public. Bob then displayed public records that showed the exaggerated billing, and Rick Whitmore, in the corner, visibly began to sweat like a man watching his meal ticket go up in flames. Desperate to shift the focus from financial malfeasance, Karen launched a personal assault on me that would have made a political strategist blush. She brought up Sarah's death, implying I was mentally unstable and a threat to families. She accused me of stalking innocent children and being a dangerous recluse who was harming property values. The room fell into a dead silence. Even Karen's supporters seemed repulsed by her willingness to exploit a widower's grief for political advantage. Janet Morrison stood up, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. "Karen, you fined me $200 for a bird bath. When did we become so unkind to our neighbors?" Other residents then began to share their own experiences of harassment and intimidation. The floodgates had opened, and years of suppressed frustration poured out like water from a breached levee. Karen attempted to adjourn the meeting, but the residents would not be dismissed. The taste of democracy was too satisfying after years of authoritarian control. I walked to the podium with my binders of documentation, and Karen made one final, desperate move. "I will not allow you to ruin our community," she yelled. "I'm not trying to ruin it," I replied calmly. "I'm trying to save it." The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. In the week between our garage confrontation and the final showdown, Karen went completely nuclear. I'm talking full-scale, burn everything to the ground desperation that would have impressed Napoleon during his retreat from Moscow. She hired a private investigator, some sketchy ex-cop named Wade, who drove a beat-up sedan and wore cologne that smelled like regret mixed with cigarettes. Wade started following me around town, taking pictures through my cabin windows, and even approached my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, asking questions about my mental state and daily habits. Karen's social media campaign escalated to pure fiction. She created fake profiles spreading rumors that I was planning to build a commercial fishing operation that would destroy property values. She posted doctored screenshots of threatening messages allegedly from me, complete with creative spelling errors to make them look authentic. The crown jewel of her smear campaign was claiming that Sarah had actually committed suicide and I was covering it up to protect my reputation. The woman was now weaponizing my wife's battle with cancer for political gain. Even by Karen's standards, this was a new low that would have impressed Stalin. But while Karen was busy destroying her remaining credibility with increasingly unhinged behavior, I was putting together the final pieces of evidence that would end her reign permanently. Bob Martinez had found the smoking gun. Bank records showing Karen used $85,000 from the HOA reserve fund as a down payment on a vacation condo in Myrtle Beach. The withdrawal was documented as emergency roof repairs for the community center. But the same day the money left the account, Karen closed on Beach Breeze Condominiums Unit 247. Her social media posts from that weekend showed her celebrating at the beach while homeowners thought their reserve fund was paying for infrastructure improvements. The level of brazen theft was breathtaking, like robbing a bank and then posting vacation photos with the stolen money. Patricia had been busy, too, working with the county prosecutor to build a criminal case. Each fraudulent transaction carried a potential 2 to 10-year sentence under North Carolina's embezzlement statutes. Karen wasn't just facing removal from the HOA board. She was looking at serious prison time. Meanwhile, Wade, the private investigator, overplayed his hand. Tuesday evening, Mrs. Patterson called the sheriff's office after catching him trespassing on her property and trying to peek into her windows. When deputies arrested Wade for intimidation and illegal surveillance, he immediately threw Karen under the bus to save his own skin. The arrest report specifically mentioned that Wade had been hired by HOA President Karen Whitmore to gather compromising information on a community member. Karen's intimidation campaign was now part of the official criminal record. Thursday brought the final piece of evidence I needed. My own investigator, a reputable firm that didn't smell like an ashtray, delivered a comprehensive report on Karen's history. She'd pulled identical scams in 3 previous communities across California, Arizona, and Florida. The pattern was always the same. Move in, take over the HOA, embezzle funds, create chaos, and disappear before anyone could prosecute. 2 criminal cases were still pending from her previous communities, and there was a civil judgment for $127,000 that she'd never paid. Karen wasn't just a petty neighborhood tyrant. She was a serial community destroyer with a proven track record of financial fraud. The morning of our final confrontation, I noticed a U-Haul trailer attached to Karen's BMW. She was planning to flee immediately after the meeting, probably with whatever money she could steal before the authorities caught up. The community center was packed beyond capacity. 67 residents attended, more than had ever shown up for any community event. Megan Torres and her Channel 7 news crew set up discreetly in the back. Having gotten a tip about the ongoing HOA investigation, County Prosecutor Williams sat in the back row with Detective Hayes, ready to execute an arrest warrant as soon as Karen incriminated herself on camera. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez stationed himself outside. Knowing Karen's history of volatile behavior when cornered, Karen arrived wearing expensive new jewelry that had definitely been purchased with HOA funds. Her face showed the kind of desperate confidence you see in pyramid scheme organizers just before the collapse. Her husband Rick was notably absent. Apparently, he'd already fled to relatives in Oklahoma with their liquid assets. She tried to control the meeting from the start, limiting discussion and claiming security concerns required an abbreviated agenda. But when I requested recognition under Robert's Rules of Order, Patricia stood up with our completed membership documentation. The review period expired yesterday, Patricia announced clearly. Mr. Henderson is now an official HOA member with 31% voting share. Karen's face went white as the power dynamic shifted permanently. The room buzzed with excitement as residents realized Karen no longer controlled their community's future. I approached the podium carrying 3 binders of evidence, my voice calm and professional from 20 years of municipal meetings. I'd like to present some financial irregularities for board review. Karen jumped up, screaming, "You can't discuss confidential HOA business?" I looked directly at the news camera. "Ma'am, embezzlement isn't confidential, it's criminal." The taste of justice was finally within reach, and Karen's reign of petty terror was about to end in spectacular fashion. All I had to do was present the evidence and let the facts speak for themselves. The only question was whether Karen would go quietly or drag the entire community through one final, humiliating spectacle of narcissistic rage. Based on her track record, I was betting on the spectacle. The decisive moment arrived with the force of a freight train packed with justice and documentary proof. 67 residents filled the community center, generating a charged atmosphere that smelled of anticipation mingled with the faint aroma of coffee from the concession area. The lights from the Channel 7 cameras threw everything into sharp relief, giving the scene the feel of a courtroom drama nearing its climax. Karen was seated at the front table, her new jewelry worn like a suit of armor, but her hands trembled slightly as she fumbled with a pile of fraudulent legal papers. The U-Haul trailer, clearly visible through the window, broadcasted her confidence level about the evening's proceedings to everyone present. "I'd like to present some financial irregularities for board review," I stated, my voice imbued with the calm assurance of someone who had spent 2 decades uncovering municipal malfeasance. "You can't discuss confidential HOA business?" Karen shrieked, her voice reaching a frequency that likely disturbed dogs in the neighboring county. I turned my gaze directly to the news camera and smiled. "Ma'am, embezzlement isn't confidential. It's criminal." Bob Martinez approached the projection screen, his accountant's exactitude slicing through Karen's years of financial obfuscation like a beacon through a storm. The initial slide displayed her husband's landscaping company, billed for $67,000, with an actual work value of $23,000. This indicates a consistent pattern of inflated charges. Bob clarified to the astonished crowd. Pool maintenance was billed for daily service, but actual visits were weekly, legal fees covered. Payments to Mrs. Whitmore's personal divorce lawyer, paid for with community funds. Karen lunged at Bob's laptop like a crazed Wolverine, yelling that the figures were all lies and fabrications. Her frantic effort to halt the presentation only served to make her appear more culpable, as security camera footage then showed financial transfers from HOA accounts going straight into her personal bank. Several residents gasped audibly when the purchase of the Beach Breeze condominium flashed on the screen. $85,000 withdrawn for emergency roof repairs. On the same day, Karen finalized the purchase of her vacation condo. Her social media posts from that weekend depicted her celebrating on the beach, while homeowners believed their money was being used for community infrastructure. It was at this point that my investigator's report delivered the final blow. "I'll continue," I said, moving to slides that detailed Karen's criminal past. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Karen Whitmore Johnson, a serial community destroyer." The room filled with stunned murmurs as her true identity was exposed. 3 prior communities had been ruined by identical schemes. Criminal charges were pending in California for grand theft and fraud. A civil judgment in Arizona for $89,000 in restitution remained unpaid. Karen's first complete breakdown then commenced in full. She screamed that it was all falsehoods and a conspiracy, while her few remaining supporters quietly slipped toward the exits. When she lunged for the microphone, her voice was strained with desperation. "This man is a danger. He threatened to poison our water supply. He has been stalking children." Her accusations grew more and more outlandish and transparently false. She produced a clearly forged mental health assessment, which even had the incorrect doctor's license number. The document was so patently fake that several residents actually laughed. It was then that County Prosecutor Williams rose to his feet, his badge gleaming in the fluorescent lighting. "Mrs. Whitmore, I am Prosecutor Williams. You are being accused of embezzling $127,000 from your neighbors." The camera crew drew nearer as Karen grasped that she had been recorded committing perjury and making false allegations on live television. Her face cycled through a range of colors that would have impressed a mood ring. "This is illegal surveillance," she shrieked, charging at the camera crew. "You can't film me without my consent." The sound of her designer heels sliding on the polished floor as she lost her footing was almost comical. Were the circumstances not so grave? Detective Hayes approached with handcuffs, reciting the Miranda rights while Karen yelled about conspiracies and unlawful persecution. The charges were read out loud for the cameras. Embezzlement, fraud, filing false police reports, and witness intimidation. Each charge carried significant prison time, and the evidence against her was irrefutable as Karen was escorted away in handcuffs, still yelling threats at everyone present. A stunned silence fell over the community center. The U-Haul trailer was promptly searched, uncovering stolen HOA property, which included a commercial-grade lawnmower and pool equipment valued at thousands of dollars. After the police cars had vanished into the night, I turned to the shell-shocked residents who were still there. "I never intended to destroy this community," I said, my voice resonating in the now silent room. "I wanted to save it." The applause began slowly, initiated by Janet Morrison, and then swept through the crowd like a wildfire. People were crying, embracing, and finally giving voice to years of pent-up frustration and relief. I called for an immediate emergency vote to oust Karen from all her HOA roles, which passed unanimously since her proxy votes were now void. A temporary board was established right there. Bob was appointed treasurer, Janet as secretary, and Lisa Park as president. When someone inquired if I wanted a position on the board, I politely declined with a smile. "I would rather serve as an advisor. My lake is always available for community fishing, and I believe it's time we started behaving like actual neighbors instead of adversaries." The meeting concluded with something I hadn't witnessed in 3 years. Neighbors engaging with one another as human beings, not as combatants in a war over property values. The victory was sweet, but the deepest satisfaction came from seeing a community begin the process of healing after years of oppressive rule. Karen's reign of petty terror was finished, and democracy had triumphed with the aid of receipts, documentation, and one very costly U-Haul trailer filled with evidence. Justice was served, accompanied by a side of proper financial accounting and a strong measure of community solidarity. The best part? It was all entirely legal, meticulously documented, and recorded on camera for all to see. Sometimes the good guys do win, especially when they come to the fight with better lawyers and actual proof. 6 months later, I find myself sitting on my dock, observing children learning to fish as their parents engage in genuine conversation, no longer acting like warriors in a property value battle. The aroma of grilling burgers from our inaugural annual Lake Day celebration wafts across the water, blending with the pine fragrance and the sound of authentic laughter. A sound this community hadn't experienced in years. Karen received a 4-year sentence in state prison after entering a guilty plea. To evade a trial, the asset forfeiture proceedings managed to recover most of the embezzled funds, including her cherished beach condo, which was confiscated more swiftly than one could say emergency roof repairs. Her husband, Rick, was extradited from Oklahoma and sentenced to 18 months for conspiracy, while the fraudulent inspector, Randy, received probation and a lifetime prohibition from any government employment. The newly formed HOA board initiated what we dubbed the Transparency Revolution. All financial documents are now published online each month. Competitive bidding is mandatory for any contract exceeding $1,000, and quarterly town hall meetings have taken the place of Karen's clandestine board sessions. We overturned every one of her tyrannical rules, transforming the community covenant from a tool of harassment into practical guidelines for neighborly conduct. The zoning issue that could have resulted in the demolition of 31 homes was resolved through authentic community teamwork. I leveraged my municipal contacts to help guide the variance renewal process, collaborating with county planning to develop a sustainable growth plan that safeguarded both the environment and property values. The community now holds permanent grandfather status, and 15 of the problematic houses were moved at the developer's cost to comply with environmental regulations. My lake has become the nucleus of our recovering community, Sarah's Sanctuary, named in memory of my late wife, now facilitates fishing tutorials for local children, offers community canoe storage, and provides a space for peaceful evening swims for anyone in need of the same therapy I once sought. The dock that Pop built in 1952 has been enlarged to welcome the entire neighborhood, and the sound of children splashing in the water would have brought a smile to Sarah's face. The positive effects extended well beyond our small subdivision. Megan Torres's investigative report earned a regional Emmy, and the story went viral under the headline, "How One Man Saved His Community from an HOA Tyrant." I was eventually called to testify before the state legislature on HOA accountability reform, contributing to the drafting of what is now known as Karen's Law, legislation that mandates annual independent audits and transparent financial reporting for all homeowner associations. 3 other local communities sought my assistance with their own problematic boards, and I found a new purpose I had never anticipated. There is a profound sense of fulfillment in applying 20 years of municipal finance expertise to empower neighbors to reclaim their communities from petty despots who believe that property ownership grants them feudal rights. The financial turnaround surpassed all expectations through asset seizures, insurance payouts, and the recovery of stolen property. We ended up with more funds than before Karen's criminal activities began. Monthly dues were reduced to $180, a rate lower than when Karen first came to power, and our reserve fund is more robust than ever. Property values saw a 12% increase following Karen's ousting, demonstrating that effective governance and community cohesion are more beneficial for real estate prices than authoritarian control and perpetual legal battles. Who would have imagined that treating neighbors with basic human decency actually enhances a neighborhood's appeal? On a personal note, the lake that preserved my sanity after Sarah's passing has evolved into something even more profound, a representation of community restoration and collective purpose. The sorrow over my wife's death will forever be a part of me, but directing that pain toward helping others has infused my life with new significance. Last week, I got a call from a distraught homeowner in Tennessee. It was another tale of HOA corruption, this time involving a veteran whose disability-related modifications were being obstructed by a power-obsessed board president. "Sir, I heard about your actions in North Carolina," the voice said, filled with a mix of frustration and hope. "My HOA is trying to fine me for putting in wheelchair ramps." I gazed out at my lake, where Janet Morrison was showing her granddaughter how to cast a fishing line, while Bob Martinez was grilling burgers for the monthly community barbecue. The sound of neighbors genuinely enjoying one another's company filled the evening air like a melody. "Tell me everything," I replied, already grabbing my notebook. "Let's see what we can accomplish, because this is what I've learned from this entire ordeal. Petty tyrants only succeed when good people remain silent, but when neighbors unite, armed with proper documentation, legal insight, and the bravery to resist, justice is not just a possibility. It's a certainty. The most effective revenge against corrupt power is not more corruption. It's constructing something better, together. If you have your own HOA nightmare to share, post it in the comments below. I read each and every one, and some of these stories are truly astonishing. Believe me, Karen was not even the worst I've encountered. And hey, if the story has inspired you to think differently about confronting the petty tyrants in your own life, hit that subscribe button because there are more tales of community justice on the way. Next week's story features an HOA president who attempted to take a veteran service dog. You will be absolutely astounded by how that one concludes. Sometimes the good guys really do come out on top, especially when they show up with receipts, competent legal counsel, and the firm conviction that neighbors deserve better than to live under the dominion of narcissistic bullies. Now, if you'll pardon me, I have some trout to feed and a community to appreciate. Share your thoughts down below and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.